You wake up tomorrow and realize that everything you own is gone. Your house, your car, your bank account, even the clothes on your body no longer belong to you. Every contract you ever signed is cancelled. You can't sue anyone. You can't be sued. In the eyes of the law, you don't exist. You are property. This isn't a nightmare. This was everyday life for every married woman in Tudor England, and the king, who famously executed 2 of his wives, wasn't an exception. He was simply the most visible symbol of a system that had already wiped out the legal identity of half the population. This is the story of coverture, the law that turned marriage into ownership and women into possessions. What you're about to hear will completely change how you see the reign of Henry Roman VIII. History remembers his 6 wives, the divorces, the executions, the drama at court. What it forgets are the hundreds of thousands of ordinary women who endured something arguably worse. They were legally dead while still alive. If you're fascinated by forgotten court records, by documents buried in archives that show how power really worked rather than the clean version taught in school, then every view, every like, and every subscription helps us uncover more stories like this. We dig through Tudor legal records and overlooked manuscripts scholars have ignored for centuries. Now, back to the story, because what we're about to uncover makes many injustices you've heard of seem temporary by comparison. Imagine it's the year 1535. You're standing inside a small parish church in Yorkshire. You're 19 years old, the daughter of a successful wool merchant. Your father has spent years teaching you the trade. You know how to bargain with shepherds, judge the quality of fleece, and keep detailed account books. You've been running parts of the business since you were 15. Today is your wedding day. You're marrying the son of another merchant family. You're wearing your best gown, bought with money you earned yourself. Hidden in a leather purse beneath your skirts are coins you've carefully saved over the years. After the ceremony, there will be a feast, partly paid for by your dowry of 200, a massive sum in a time when a skilled craftsman might earn 5 a year. The priest begins the ceremony. You speak your vows. Your husband places a ring on your finger, and in that exact moment you stop existing, not physically. Your heart still beats, your lungs still fill with air, but legally you have just died. The woman who walked into this church, a merchant's daughter with her own income, her own property, her own legal identity, is gone. In her place stands a femme covert, a covered woman, and the law is very clear about what that means. The doctrine of coverture stretched back centuries, inherited from Norman French law after the conquest of 1066. The legal idea was chilling in its simplicity. A husband and wife were considered one person under the law, and that person was the husband. Let's be very clear about how this worked in real life. That 200 dowry you brought into the marriage is now his, not shared, his alone. The coins in your purse belong to him. The gown you're wearing is legally his property. Any money you earn in the future, from weaving, selling goods at market, or any kind of labor, becomes his the moment it touches your hands. But the erasure goes far beyond property. You can no longer enter into a legal contract. Any agreement you try to make to sell goods or services is automatically invalid. You can't sue someone who wrongs you. Only your husband can do that for you. You can't be sued for debts either, because legally you're not capable of owning debt. If someone slanders you, damages what used to be your property, or even assaults you, you cannot take them to court. Your husband is your only legal voice. When you return to the market after your wedding to sell wool, buyers are confused. They've done business with your family for years, but now they're told they must negotiate with your husband instead. When you try to collect money owed to you for goods sold before your marriage, you learn you no longer have the legal right to collect it. Those debts now belong to your husband. Your father had set aside a small workshop with looms and spinning wheels as part of your marriage portion. You plan to run it yourself, hire other women, and build something independent. But under coverture, you can't legally hire workers, sign contracts with suppliers, or even rent the building without your husband's involvement. If your husband is supportive, he might allow you to continue acting as your legal stand-in. But if he's indifferent, hostile, or simply bad at business, there's nothing you can do. The workshop meant to give you independence becomes just another item on his list of assets. And if he's cruel, if he drinks away your earnings, gambles your inheritance, or beats you and you try to leave, the law offers almost no help. Divorce, as we understand it, doesn't exist. Legal separation is rare, expensive, and doesn't restore your legal identity or your property. For most women, farmers' wives, craftsmen's daughters, servants, laborers, there are no protections at all. They experience coverture in its purest, most absolute form. Their survival depends entirely on the hope that their husbands will be kind and competent managers of the family's property. Hope is not a strategy, but for most women, it's the only option they have. In Tudor England, if you were born female into a family with any property, your economic value was calculated from birth, not your skills, not your intelligence, not your potential. Your worth was measured as a commodity in the marriage market. Fathers kept ledgers. They recorded their daughters' portions alongside livestock and land values. A first daughter might be listed at 100 marks, a second at 80. The numbers were exact, cold, and purely transactional. English inheritance laws favored primogeniture. The eldest son inherited the estate intact. Daughters received dowries, a single payment that would be their only inheritance. And remember, the moment they married, coverture ensured they would lose control of it. Picture a meeting inside a wealthy London townhouse. Two fathers sit across a table, wine poured, documents spread between them. They're negotiating their children's futures. My daughter brings 200 in coin, plus household linens worth 20, says the first man, a successful cloth merchant. She's trained in managing a household. She can read and write. She's of good character. She's 16. The second man, a minor gentleman with a small estate in Kent, nods. My son will provide her with a jointure, 1/3 use of the estate if he dies first. She'll have her own chamber, an annual clothing allowance, and I'll settle 20 on her at marriage. They might as well be trading horses. Notice who isn't part of this discussion: the young people themselves. The daughter's feelings, goals, and desires don't matter. This is a business deal, and the daughter is a bundle of assets being transferred from one balance sheet to another. For daughters, the psychological impact was devastating. Their value was openly priced. A girl with a 200 dowry was literally worth twice as much as her sister with 100. Everyone knew it, and when things went wrong, the consequences were severe. A merchant family with 3 daughters might see their business collapse. A ship sinks, a partner defaults, disease spreads. Suddenly, the promised dowries can't be paid. The daughters become unmarriageable. Suitors disappear, their futures vanish. They're left as unwanted dependents in a brother's household, burdens with no path to independence. The most famous example involved a queen. When Catherine of Aragon married Henry Roman VIII's older brother Arthur in 1501, Spain paid an enormous dowry of 200,000 crowns, roughly 40,000. But Arthur died just months later. Catherine's parents demanded the dowry be returned. Henry Roman VIII refused. For 7 years, Catherine lived in England in near poverty. Her dowry had been paid but was unreachable. Her status was undefined. Her future was suspended in limbo. Catherine's life, caught between 2 kingdoms and 2 marriages, treated like disputed property, was extreme in scale but not in nature. Thousands of ordinary women faced similar situations, their lives trapped inside the machinery of dowry disputes and inheritance law. These stories aren't taught in classrooms. They survive in legal filings, court cases, and church records. This is the hidden history of how the law turned women into property. If you believe these voices deserve to be heard, subscribe and turn on notifications. We're only halfway through this story, and what comes next is even more unsettling. On July 11, 1533, Pope Clement Roman VII issued his ruling. Henry Roman VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon was valid. His marriage to Anne Boleyn was not. Henry's response was immediate and absolute. He rejected the authority of the Pope, declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, and condemned Catherine to a slow, humiliating erasure. Catherine, Queen of England for 24 years, was stripped of her title. She was renamed Princess Dowager of Wales. She was forbidden from seeing her daughter Mary. She was moved again and again, each residence smaller, colder, and more isolated than the last. Her household was reduced. Her income slashed. She was watched, controlled, and worn down. When Catherine died in January 1536, many believed she had been poisoned. The truth was almost worse. She had been legally and socially destroyed, erased while still alive. And every woman in England understood exactly what that meant. Catherine of Aragon was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, the most powerful monarchs in Europe. She was highly educated, politically skilled, respected, and deeply loved by the English people. She had ruled as regent. She had defended England against invasion. She had given Henry a surviving child, a daughter named Mary. None of it mattered. When Henry wanted a son and a new wife, Catherine became disposable. If a queen with royal blood, powerful allies, and decades of loyal service could be cast aside, what safety did any other woman have? The message spread through every layer of society. Merchants' wives whispered in marketplaces. Noblewomen at court fell silent. Every married woman now knew her position depended entirely on her husband's continued favor, and that favor often depended on something completely beyond her control, producing a male heir. Here is the biological reality. A woman has roughly a 50% chance of conceiving a male child with each pregnancy. In the Tudor period, between 15 and 20% of male infants died in infancy, and many more died before adulthood. Producing even one surviving son was never guaranteed, yet the pressure was relentless. A woman who bore only daughters was labeled a failure, not by medicine, not by biology, but by law, society, and often her own family. Henry's break with Rome had another devastating consequence for women: the dissolution of the monasteries. Between 1536 and 1541, royal commissioners closed every monastery, priory, and convent in England. For monks, this was disruptive but survivable. Most were educated men who could become parish priests or tutors. They received pensions and were now free to marry. For nuns, it was catastrophic. Convents had been one of the only places in Tudor England where women could live with real autonomy. A nun was not subject to coverture because she was unmarried. She answered to her abbess, not to a father or husband. For educated women, for women who didn't want marriage, for those seeking intellectual or spiritual lives, convents offered protection and purpose. Consider Abbess Alice Montague of Barking Abbey. She led one of the wealthiest religious houses in England, managing large estates, employing hundreds of people, and exercising real local authority. When commissioners arrived in 1539, she was forced to surrender everything. Her pension of $133 a year sounded generous until you realize she had overseen an institution earning over $10,000 annually. What was Alice supposed to do? She couldn't marry. She had taken lifelong vows. She had no family estate to return to. She had spent her adult life in religious leadership, not preparing for secular survival. Her pension placed her in an impossible middle ground: too much money for manual labor, too little for independent status, and no clear social role. Now multiply Alice's story by thousands. Young nuns who entered convents as children, elderly nuns who had lived 40 or 50 years behind cloistered walls. All were displaced into a society that had no place for them. Nuns consistently received smaller pensions than monks. Some fell into poverty. Surviving petitions are heartbreaking, women begging the crown for help, describing illness, hunger, and desperation. Most were ignored. Religious upheaval created a constant atmosphere of fear. The Treason Act of 1534 made it a crime to deny the king's supremacy over the church. The law was broad and dangerous. It criminalized not just actions, but words. Domestic spaces became risky. Kitchens, bedrooms, sewing rooms, private conversations could all be dangerous. A woman who expressed sympathy for Catherine, who questioned Anne Boleyn's legitimacy, or who criticized religious changes could be accused of treason. And women were accused. Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, was executed in 1541 at the age of 67, partly for her royal lineage, but also for her perceived loyalty to Catherine. Elizabeth Barton, known as the Nun of Kent, was executed in 1534 for prophesying against the king's remarriage. Anne Askew was tortured and burned at the stake in 1546 for her Protestant beliefs. For ordinary women, the fear was quieter, but just as real. Refusing to swear the oath of supremacy could cost a woman her home and security. A woman whose husband was accused of treason could see herself and her children plunged into poverty overnight with no legal protection. In this system of near-total legal erasure, there was one grim path back to personhood. Widowhood. When a husband died, the legal covering was lifted. A widow became a legal individual again. She could own property. She could sign contracts. She could sue and be sued in her own name. She could run businesses, hire workers, and make binding decisions. For many women, this was the first time since childhood they were recognized as people under the law. Common law granted widows dower rights, usually a lifetime interest in 1/3 of their husband's property. If her husband had been a merchant or craftsman, she might inherit his tools, shop, and business connections. The paradox was stark. A woman often had to wait for her husband's death to become a full legal person. Records show something remarkable. Widows often succeeded economically. Take Joan Dance, a London brewer's widow in the 1530s. When her husband died, she inherited the brewery. Within 5 years, she expanded the business, purchased 2 more properties, and became one of the largest beer suppliers in her neighborhood. She hired workers, sued debtors, and managed complex commercial deals, all things she could not legally do while married. Court records from Tudor England are filled with widows suing for unpaid debts, widows running taverns and inns, widows working as drapers and haberdashers, widows managing estates. They appear far more often than married women because they were the only women allowed to operate independently under the law. But that freedom came with danger. A widow now stood alone, fully responsible for her own survival. If her husband died leaving debts, she could inherit those along with the property. If the business collapsed, there was no husband to rely on. Younger widows, especially those with assets, faced intense pressure to remarry. Families often pushed them toward new matches. Unscrupulous men pursued them aggressively, seeing a woman with property but no male protector as an easy target. And if a widow remarried, the cycle began again. The moment she said, "I do," coverture returned. Everything she controlled as a widow, the land, the business, the money, now belonged to her new husband. Once again, she disappeared in the eyes of the law. Think of Elena, widowed at 35 in 1528. Her husband, a successful goldsmith, left her his shop, tools, and materials. As a widow, Elena discovered abilities she never knew she had. Within 2 years, she was running a thriving operation, training apprentices, and expanding into silverwork. But pressure closed in from all sides. Her late husband's family hinted she should marry his younger brother to keep the business in the family. Her own relatives urged her toward a wealthy merchant. Male goldsmiths in the guild resented her success and tried to limit her work, arguing women shouldn't be full members. She was also lonely. Companionship was tempting, but she knew that remarriage meant surrendering everything she had built. Her shop, her hard-earned success, all of it would fall under a new husband's control. This was the widow's dilemma: freedom or companionship, autonomy or security. For men, marriage offered both. For women, it never did. Not all widows had Elena's options. Poor widows, elderly widows, and those without valuable property faced harsh realities. Parish records across Tudor England are filled with widows receiving poor relief, small church payments meant to keep them from starvation. A widow's survival often depended on the goodwill of relatives, neighbors, or parish officials, none of whom were legally required to help. What you're seeing is systematic legal erasure, a centuries-old structure that treated women's personhood as conditional. If these stories are changing how you see Tudor history, share this video. Engagement helps bring these forgotten voices back into view. Let's make sure they're not erased again. The legal force of coverture was absolute, but daily life was more complicated. Women found ways to work within the system, around it, and sometimes against it. Many marriages functioned as economic partnerships in practice. A merchant's wife might run the shop while her husband traveled. A farmer's wife managed brewing, dairying, textile production, and household labor that brought in real income. These women had no legal authority. Everything they did depended on their husband's permission. Still, the truth was simple. Many families could not survive without women's skill and labor. Some women pushed back openly and paid the price. Anne Boleyn herself was known for her sharp tongue and independence. She argued theology with Henry, involved herself in politics, and refused to play the obedient wife. Her behavior shocked the court and gave her enemies ammunition. When Henry turned against her, her boldness and interference in men's affairs were cited as proof she was unfit. She was executed on May 19, 1536, officially for adultery and treason. The charges were almost certainly false. Her real crimes were speaking too freely, failing to produce a male heir, and making powerful men uncomfortable. For most women, resistance was quieter. It took the form of small acts of survival. A wife might hide money from a reckless husband, claiming she earned less than she had. A woman might run a small trade and keep part of the profits before handing the rest over. Under coverture, this wasn't even legally theft. A wife couldn't steal from her husband because she legally owned nothing. Morally, these women were reclaiming fragments of autonomy inside a system designed to deny it entirely. Some women tried to avoid coverture altogether by refusing marriage. Wealthy women who inherited property sometimes remained single to keep control of their estates. They faced enormous social pressure, but if they endured it, they could live their entire lives as legal individuals. Elizabeth I is the most famous example. She declared herself married to England and rejected every suitor. This wasn't just symbolism. Elizabeth understood the law. Marriage would have destroyed her authority. Under coverture, her husband would legally control her person and property. She could not risk that. Coverture didn't end with the Tudors. It didn't end with the Stuarts, the Georgians, or even the Victorians. The legal doctrine that erased married women's identities survived in English law until the Married Women's Property Acts of the late 19th century, more than 300 years after Henry VIII died. The first major reform came in 1870, allowing married women to keep their own wages. Full property rights didn't arrive until 1882. Think about that timeline. The system that reduced women to legal property lasted longer than the United States has existed. Women born in the Tudor era were raised under coverture, married under it, died under it, and their daughters, granddaughters, and great-granddaughters lived under the same rules. Coverture wasn't just a legal technicality. It was the legal expression of a belief that women were not fully human in the way men were. They were dependents, permanent minors who required male control. This idea shaped everything. It justified excluding women from universities, professions, and political life. If a woman couldn't sign a contract, how could she be a lawyer? If she couldn't own property, how could she be a merchant? If her legal identity vanished into her husband's, how could she vote or govern? Legal erasure made social erasure possible. Women's experiences were dismissed, their voices ignored, their suffering rendered invisible. When history was written, it focused on kings, parliaments, and wars, all male arenas. The quiet destruction of women's lives barely appeared. History remembers Henry Roman VIII for executing 2 wives, but the true cost was far greater and far quieter. For every queen who lost her head, tens of thousands of ordinary women lost their legal existence. The merchant's daughter who watched her husband ruin her business. The widow who tasted freedom only to surrender it for companionship. The wife who died trying to give birth to the son that would make her valuable. Their names are gone, their voices were silenced, but they endured a system that declared them less than human, not through violence alone, but through law. Coverture is gone, but its victims were buried with it. These women deserve more than sympathy. They deserve remembrance. What other legal horrors are hidden in history? Share your thoughts below.